While this isn't a Warhammer video, this is certainly adjacent and something I feel strongly about. Creative Assembly has been both under fire and scrutiny for over 10 years. Over a decade, I wish to really emphasize this fact. Creative Assembly's problems with bugs, poor quality control, poor monetization, and more has persisted since around Rome 2's release. While some of the monetization issues did come about in Shogun for the piecemeal clan DLCs or the Blood DLC, the major campaigns, particularly Fall of the Samurai, is regarded so fantastically as the best piece of Total War content out there that it's difficult to genuinely say Shogun 2 was the start of CA's downfall. Rome 2, however, most certainly was. The problem stemmed from CA's rush bug job that resulted in a ton of backlash at launch. These bugs were damn near egregious, and units no longer acted as they had before in previous titles. No longer was there an attention to at least some level of realism, but instead the game took the more arcadey elements of Shogun 2 and pushed them to the nth degree. While Attila continued this trend, I feel there are a number of 4X mechanics in Attila that are interesting but was executed poorly. The implementation of a BBEG, namely Attila, a climate control mechanic, some interesting events as smaller factions, and so on. Both of these games had decent concepts but were utterly flawed in execution and fixed only, and I say that with emphasis, a half-decade later. Enter Total War Warhammer. TWW was my first introduction to Warhammer Fantasy as a setting. This is probably the most significant thing CA has ever done for me, but I have been a long-term fan of Total War since playing Medieval 2 on my grandmother's computer as a child. I played it a bit at first, but it wasn't until I had a couple of fan wikis up on my second monitor that I would start getting into Warhammer, the towns, the characters, and more. At the time, too, I began lurking in various Warhammer content creator spaces, both in the Total War space, such as Legend or Milk and Cookies, but also Warhammer-specific content creators like Sotek, Grimdark Narrator, and Arch. Before the era of controversy among some of these creators and the game itself, this really seemed like a resurgence of Warhammer Fantasy. Age of Sigmar was still riding high on its continuously mediocre releases, and as such, people grew very hungry, very fast, for Total War as their main method of Warhammer Fantasy content. Keeping in mind as well that fantasy games were few and far between, and most novels were from the 80s. This confluence of shared love of strategy and Warhammer Fantasy allowed CA to briefly print money on an unprecedented scale, acquiring a ton of new fans. This also created the divide between historical and fantasy enjoyers, although those who are familiar with CA know that this is a false equivalency. It's better to say pre or post Rome 2, as many of the problems that historical fans have an issue with persist in the historical modern Total Wars such as Pharaoh or Thrones. It's not a setting issue, but an engine issue. A multitude of both small and large controversies began to break up the community. Bad takes, jokes in poor taste, the introduction of politics, accusations, culture wars, Creative Assembly developers having crash-outs on forums. Soon the environment turned very toxic very quickly. The focus of this video then is primarily on those focused on supporting Creative Assembly's works unequivocally in this modern age, either unknowingly or willfully ignorant of Creative Assembly's extremely problematic history and unwillingness to change. This declared goal is mainly to avoid whataboutism, as I am not here to critique every single aspect of a creator I used to enjoy. I am just focusing on those who might prioritize a relationship with an extremely flawed company over their community well-being. For context, it's been 12 years since the problems began in earnest, and finally, the total goodwill from Warhammer fans have died. The goodwill from history fans has died out long ago as well. I used to play Total War every day. I would visit the forums, pop open multiplayer battle or lore videos, and would buy the series for my friends so we could play together. I have 400 hours or so in Warhammer 1, almost 4,000 in 2, and almost 1,100 in 3. I have 500 in Shogun 2, and perhaps another 5 or 6 in Medieval, counting childhood game time plus Steam numbers. The Tides of Torment trailer just dropped, and I didn't care enough to watch it yet. If that isn't a volumetric failure on Creative Assembly's part to keep a once insanely devoted fan, I don't know what is. The reasons for the unequivocal support content creators might have for Creative Assembly, I am sure, range from the simple to the varied, but on a fundamental level, content creation for the 99% of people who aren't too large to fail could genuinely become a toss-up between principle or monetization. I guess what I'm trying to say is I understand the desire to grab the bag. Simultaneously, looking at those critical of Creative Assembly's lack of a polished product, despite this being a consistent error they promise they will fix for 12 years, and dismissing these critics as idiots because Creative Assembly can either make DLC or fix bugs and only do one of those two things, is absolutely insane. I want to remind any of you who may or may not have this position that games before Rome 2, games that were both polished for their era and had genuinely large and quality DLC, existed. I want to remind you of the insane price point for all of these new DLCs, that most content creators not in line with CA have to buy themselves. The reason CA can't do both is because they are ruining their goodwill with the community, and the community is tired of it. The price points have become too high, and the lack of polish for an increased price is consumerist suicide. People are no longer buying the content, buying into the hype, or engaging with the community with as much fervor. I am, by no other measure, a filthy degenerate. My eccentricity and madness match my passion and fervor. I'm not coming from the soapbox here, degrading the morals of content creators who might be pro-CA no matter what for the bag. I'm coming from the stance of, you're killing any goodwill you might have with your community if CA dies. Especially as a tiny and biasedly unappreciated content creator, it's just kind of insane to me to watch these train wrecks occur in real time. And while, in an ideal world, I would love if Creative Assembly could improve their problems, I am genuinely unsure if they can. When you have a 500,000 channel leaving Total War behind, that's important to note. When you have massive delays on simple Lord packs, that's important to note. When you have people constantly clamoring for change, it's indicative that they still want to give CA money. They just want CA to be better. And they have the right to demand that, given the expense they pay and the time investment they put in. They don't have early access keys or insider invites. They don't have a partner program or clout. They have less money in their wallets and more unfixed bugs than they care to count. If you viciously support a company that is clearly engaging in such a way that damages both the medium it peddles and demands exponentially higher prices for it to boot, you, much like Creative Assembly, will eventually find yourself with little consumer support, so it might be best to change course. And to Creative Assembly, I really don't have to say much. Fix the game, solve the technical debt, make a new engine, and be open to criticism. It's healthy for any game series long term. I hope Tides of Torment isn't as lackluster as the Tomercon, Changeling, or Goldfax sets. I genuinely want the game to improve, and for your next major release to be polished on release. This 2020's trend of releasing now and fixing later is fostering nothing but enmity with your fans. Good luck.